Good evening, everyone. Call the regular meeting of council to order. Recommendation that the regular council meeting be suspended and the committee of the whole meeting be convened. Moved by Councillor Niche, second by Councillor Scott Morvin. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, call tonight's special committee of the whole meeting to order. Recommendation that the agenda for the committee of the whole meeting of February 28th. Oh, today's not February 28th. Today is, what's today? March 14th. 2022 be adopted as circulated. Moved by Councillor Addy, seconded by Councillor Moreau. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, we have our budget presentation this evening, the initial one, by our CFO, Corinne Bobman. We'll let you take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. We are presenting the 2022 municipal budget for the City of Prince Rupert. For the benefit of Council and our audience, we have prepared a presentation to accompany the report before Council at this Committee of the Whole. The report is for information purposes, and it is requested that Council defer direction with respect to the 5-year financial plan and related tax rate bylaw until after the public opportunity for feedback and final BC assessment numbers are received. Our presentation order is as follows. We would like to take a few minutes to reacquaint everyone with what services are offered by the city and what assumptions are made building the budget. We'll then proceed with budget requests identified since the capital budget was approved, as well as the significant cost drivers behind this year's budget for established service delivery, which drives the recommendation. We will show the proposed rates and provide information the public can review and methods available for feedback. Our budget is made up of many services which are offered year-round. We work each day to keep the streets clear for commuting, the water flowing when you turn on your taps and flush the toilets, the waste removed, the community safe, and the places for play available. Embedded within these are information technology, financial and customer support services, communications, fire response and dispatch, engineering, fleet and building maintenance, bylaw enforcement and police detachment support, city beautification, and economic development. We are a large employer with approximately 175 full-time employees and nearly 100 casual workers. The budget for the city supports all of these services named, which are used generally by every person in the city daily. The city pays for these services through 3 self-funded utility funds and an operating fund. Each utility has fees that pay for its function and capital infrastructure. The operating fund is funded through grants, leases, fees, and property tax. Operating pays for things like security services, recreation, and roads, amongst others. Property taxes do not pay for utilities, and likewise, utility fees do not pay for operating or other utilities functions. In January, BC Assessment released the property assessment roll. This information is critical in calculating one of the municipality's largest sources of revenues for the operating fund, which is property tax. This year, residential assessment increased, on average, 31%. In building the budget for 2022, there are certain financial plan assumptions that are embedded, including provision for statutory financial obligations and debt servicing requirements, ensuring provision for contractual requirements including wages, services, and supplies, including financial assistance to organizations through grants and permissive exemptions, making assumptions for energy and supply cost escalations, adherence to legislative requirements and strategic plans of council, maintaining service levels at those already in place, and maintaining sufficient cash on hand to meet obligations as they come due. With 2021 behind us, we have been able to make more informed projections of the cost of providing service after taking into account all other sources of revenue before using BC Assessment's values to balance the budget through taxation. Certain financial items of note for 2022 are wage, benefit, and WorkSafe premium increases have been offset by savings on capital spending previously funded by taxation in 2021, as well as net new taxation from new builds and fee increases. We will continue to use the COVID-19 Safe Restart funds to offset impacted revenue losses in departments still affected by the pandemic, such as the airport ferry. The paving program will continue to remain at the same level as 2021, and utilities funds are self-funding, and increases in utilities rates have covered budgeted operational increases to maintain the water, sanitary, and solid waste services. In December, we presented to Council the capital budget and special projects requests so staff could begin planning for and procuring the goods and services necessary to undertake the projects throughout the year. We are bringing back certain projects to this meeting which have been updated, as well as those that are new for 2022. Additionally, we are presenting the operating budget requests, which make up the significant cost drivers behind the recommendation to balance the city's operating budget for the year. As in December, we will proceed through the document before Council by category. Staff members are present to answer any questions Council may have of a particular request. This time, Council is asked to reserve deliberation on a request until after the public has had an opportunity to provide input and the final BC assessment values are made available. Council will have an opportunity at a later date to discuss whether items are included in the 2022 budget. I now ask Council to turn to page 15 of their document. Viewers will see the same information on their screen. Beginning with the changes in capital projects. In December, the value presented for the RCMP detachment was $30 million. This change notes the value is updated to $26.1 million. The city is currently in the loan process to obtain the loan amount noted of $25 million. This update is for the amount expected to be spent in 2022 on the Woodworth Dam replacement project. There is no additional funding requested. Rather, there is an update of the value rolled over that was not spent in 2021. Moving to page 16, similar to the last item, this change addresses amounts not spent in 2021 and rolled over to 2022. There is one addition, however, of $529,000 to be funded by reserves to repair a tear that was sustained to the new landfill cell liner during the severe windstorm in November 2021. This concludes the capital budget changes, and we will now proceed to the new capital requests. Turning to page 17. This item is for leasehold upgrades to the McCarthy dealership property for the Public Works crews. Asset cost is $750,000 funded through a dividend. The next item is roof improvements at the Canfisco warehouse, estimated to cost $150,000 funded through a dividend. Page 18 relates to the 3rd Avenue and Fulton Streetlight report with a cost of $50,000 funded through a dividend. This is the end of the new capital requests. On page 19, we note a change to a special project approved in December. This item, survey, benchmarks, and right-of-ways, has been removed from the 2022 budget. The next 3 items on page 20 are all new special projects, with the first being downtown revitalization and asset management. Project cost of $150,000 funded by a dividend. The next item is the 2022 municipal election. Estimated cost is $40,000 funded through taxation. And the last item in the special projects category is the situation tables project, cost of $43,000 funded by a grant. Beginning on page 22 is our first new operating fund item, being staffing addition to the fire department. I apologize that it is small on the screen. The operating cost is $430,000 funded through taxation. The next item on page 23 is the Public Works occupancy lease in the amount of $310,000 funded through taxation. The next item on the same page is the RCMP contract increase funded through taxation in the amount of $380,000. On page 24 is the maintenance cost of the new 24-hour public washroom with a taxation cost of $30,000. The last item is a transfer to capital reserves in the amount of $400,000 funded through taxation. After allocating all available funding, the amount needed to balance the budget of $700,000, which is a mill rate increase of 3.63%. As mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, residential values increased on average 31% over last year. For those owners with an increase of 31% or more, taxpayers would have seen a tax increase even with no mill rate increase proposed. With the proposed increase to balance the budget, homeowners with assessed values that went up more than 26% will see an increase in their municipal bill. We have been fortunate enough over the past 7 years to have not had an increase of more than 0.5% overall. This is more than beat inflation in the same period. Given the fact our assessed values have increased over time and there have been minimal to zero increases to the mill rate in the same period, our residential mill rate has dropped since 2014. This table shows the comparison between the 2021 mill rate and the proposed mill rate for 2022 for the residential, light industrial, business, and not-for-profit classes. BC Assessment will release the revised roll on March 31st, which will take into account any appeals to assessed value. It is expected that changes are likely based on the revised roll, and any reductions to assessed values may impact the proposed mill rates. Property taxes are not based on means to pay. Therefore, we want to make homeowners aware of some programs that help to aid those that may qualify. The provincial government offers residents the homeowner grant and tax deferral programs. These programs are available to reduce taxes paid and defer the tax payment through a loan that is recovered at the time of sale. Details can be found on the provincial government website, the city's website, or on the property tax notice. As in last year, homeowners must make application to the province for the homeowner grant before the tax payment deadline on July 4th, or a provincial penalty will be applied. Go to gov.bc.ca/homeowner grant or call toll-free 1-888-355-2700 for more information and to make application. We have prepared the budget document, which will be available tomorrow, March 15th at City Hall and at the library. This document and this presentation will also be placed on the city's website. We encourage people to review it, given it provides additional useful information. Also available online and at City Hall and the library by request is the 2022 Capital Budget and Special Projects document prepared for Council on December 13th, 2021. This document presents the project requests presented at that time so staff could begin procurement and planning. Also available is the document attached to Council's report this evening, which includes the write-ups in the slides with this really small print. This is the second year we are using our budget simulation to obtain interactive feedback from the community. Starting with the city's balanced operations budget, this easy-to-use simulation puts the user in the driver's seat of municipal service funding. There's information on all the revenue and spending categories for people to understand what each department does. The tool requires the user to submit a balanced budget or one with a surplus. I'll pop over to the tool now to show it to the public. So when people first enter, they will be greeted by the welcome screen that will instruct them how to use the tool. They will be asked if they are a resident or not. Once in, users will see that there are three main features: the spending, and also represented by the wheel, and revenue, which is a bar. And then, of course, there's the balance bar. To use the simulation, you can adjust spending and revenues to tailor it to suit your priorities. Remember, if you make an adjustment, so let's increase roads here, you need to adjust another category, be it spending or revenues. In order to fund it. And then if you want to learn more information, you can hover over any of the bubbles. And also, if you make any changes, sometimes it will give you a notification and ask you whether you want to make the change. And you can go ahead and add comments if you'd like to. When you're done, simply click Submit. The simulation won't let you submit a deficit. If you want to start over, you can hit Reset All, or you can save your progress and return to your simulation later, which is right here. You can also see where your estimated tax dollars will be allocated based on the city's proposed budget by checking out Taxpayer Receipt, which is down here at the bottom where it says Here. And once you click into it, it asks you if you own a home. Click yes. I'm going to put in the average assessed value. And it will tell you, based on your taxes for your municipal bill, how much of it goes to each department. This simulation will be available tonight after the regular council meeting and open until Tuesday, April the 12th. Give it a try and provide your feedback by submitting your balanced budget. And finally, there are other ways to participate in providing feedback on the budget by email, phone, and mail, as well as in person at the council meeting dates on March 28th and April 11th. Thank you for listening to this presentation. We look forward to hearing from people as we proceed through the budget process. And if council has any questions for any of the staff that are here about some of the specific requests, you can go ahead and ask now.
Questions from council? Go ahead.
You've probably answered this many, many times, and this is more for the public listening than anything. Can you explain for the public the three major industries and why the caps are in place?
There's just major industry. And I think what you're referring to is there's a Port Property Tax Act governs properties that are a major industry, which are import-export facilities, terminals. Some qualify, or actually most of the ones that we have here qualify for the Port Property Tax Act, and the province has a capped rate for municipal mill rates for their taxes. Their properties typically decline in value through depreciation. A declining value with a capped rate means less and less taxes every single year. There are other major industries that do not qualify, and those are the two recent ones, being AltaGas and Pembina. They export propane, which is not a qualifying property for that particular act. Those ones do not have a cap on them that is legislated by the province, and council has the ability to set their taxation rates as council does for all other property tax classes.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Just following up on that, because if you don't have the number tonight, that's fine. I'll defer any of my other questions until until we hear from the public. Do you know the net impact of the depreciated values to our budget this year?
Yes, this year it's estimated at $23,000.
A $23,000 loss to us, or $23,000 amount of depreciation?
$23,000 loss to us.
Okay, understood.
Without commenting on specifics, because I think we need to hear from the public before we sort of tear some of that stuff apart or build it up. I do a question about how it's determined in looking at these items. How is it determined that one item would be funded through reserves or surplus and another one via taxation?
Typically, reserves or surplus are allocated towards capital items, so one-time items. Also, some reserves actually have reasons or legislation behind them, requirements, statutory requirements as to what they can be used for. Some of the reserves we placed in reserve because we received large grants which were specific for capital items, and so they got allocated to reserves, and so now we are actually spending them into those projects that they were allocated for. Taxation is typically, it is the last resort that we utilize in order to fund operations. And after receiving certain operating grants that we do get, same small community grants, we get also any traffic fine grants that we share, but also after user fees, then taxation is the one thing that we have to be able to fund regular operating. Surplus is not recommended to fund regular operating, because if you fund it at one time, it means it's a doubling of the taxation burden the following year.
Thanks, and you may have answered this within that, but the follow-up I had was what degrees of freedom are there in terms of adjusting or moving something that's been designated to be dealt with out of reserves towards something that's been designated to be dealt with by taxation?
There actually is no flexibility in utilizing reserves for operating funds, if that's what you're referring to.
No other comments? So when do we usually finalize the budget dates-wise?
It has to be adopted by May the 13th this year. We typically try to have it done at the end of April to give the public as much time as possible to be able to calculate what the taxation burden might be to them.
Right. So just for the public's reference, this is, based on staff's estimates on what needs to change, what are the funding priorities based on, health and safety issues, things like that, contractual obligations. Then we hear from the public. We have the simulation, budget simulator. We're going to have the final estimates from BC Assessment at the end of March. And then a more complete picture kind of gets put to place. And then once we hear from the public council, then we'll start to debate priorities. And so based on what is projected versus what is reality, it most likely could change based on how council feels that could go. But for us to make those decisions, we need to hear from the public. So it's very important that you participate in the budget process. I understand it's not the most exciting thing to do, but that is how we set priorities, and we have our own list of priorities clearly, but we also want to hear from your guys' priorities, and the budget simulation tool is actually a great tool for you to not just play with the budget, but to actually leave feedback for staff on, and we get a report based on that feedback as well, where you feel tweaks could be made specifically. It helps you visualize the budget better, so you can certainly use that tool or send emails and that kind of thing as well. But we're just trying our best to make sure that it's as accessible as possible to the public. So please participate. Please let us know what you think, and so we can make the best decisions possible for you. See no other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one question for the CFO. Can you tell us what the cost of living is for this year, and how the budget compares to that?
Yeah, actually, it was in one of my presentation slides. I believe that the inflation rate was at 3.4%, and this proposed tax increase is 3.63%.
So within line of cost of living increases. Okay, thank you very much. All right, entertain a motion to adjourn and reconvene the regular council meeting. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, second by Councillor Scott Morvan. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, item 2, recommendation that the agenda for the regular council meeting of March 14th, 2022 be adopted with the addition of item 4K, development variance permit DVP 2107 for 2017 Avenue East. Moved by Councillor Scott Morvan, second by Councillor Niche. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Item 3A, recommendation that the minutes of the special council meeting of February 28th, 2022 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Ady, second by Councillor Reinhawa. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Item 3B, recommendation the minutes of the regular council meeting of February 28th, 2022 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, second by Councillor Scott Morvan. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. And item 3C, recommendation that the minutes of the committee of the whole meeting of February 28th, 2022 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Reinhawa, second by Councillor Murrow. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Excuse me. Item 4A, report from planning regarding DVP 2114 for 1429 Overlook Avenue or Overlook Street. Is there anyone speaking to this, or? So the recommendation is that council proceed with the approval for development variance permit DVP 2114. Moved by Councillor Niche, second by Councillor Scott Morvan. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Item 4B, recommendation from planning. Recommendation council proceed with approval of DVP 2204. Moved by Councillor Scott Morvan, second by Councillor Niche. Discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Item 4C, recommendation that council proceed with the statutory notification process for development variance permit application DVP 2201. Moved by Councillor Scott Morvan, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Does anyone want to speak to this one? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so speaking to application for DVP 2201, the applicant wishes to build a single family, loud enough here, a single family residence at the currently empty lot at 1531 Atlan Avenue. They are requesting 3 variances. The first variance is section 2.4 of the zoning bylaw, which relates to maximum lot coverage. The bylaw permits 50% lot coverage in this area, and they are requesting 64.9% of the lot to be covered, which is an exceedance of 14.9% or 69.21 meters squared. And the rationale for this is to provide an enlarged garage that accommodates through regular sized vehicles and removes on-street parking requirements, and to provide a walkway to the garage side door for entrance for adequate accessibility to and from the interior of the house. The next variance request is section 5.2.3, which is related to maximum gross floor area. The permitted gross floor area for the property is 464.52 meters squared, and the planned residence would exceed this permitted size by 97.0 square meters, so it would be about 561.6 meters squared. And this is to accommodate the to accommodate an increase in interior space to accommodate additional activities due to lifestyle shifts from COVID-19. Then the final section for requested variance is section 5.2.7, which is related to maximum building heights. The permitted height currently is 9 meters, and they are requesting a building height of 11.16 meters, which would exceed the maximum height by 2.6 meters. And the rationale for this is to build a garage that would be at grade level and protect the home from any potential flooding. There are no major impacts to the neighbors' views that we identified as a result of the height variance. However, it may introduce additional shade to the deck of the neighbor on the northeast side of the lot. Otherwise, no negative impacts due to the requested variances were identified, but the public will have the opportunity to present their concerns upon going to notification.
Thank you. Comments?
Being someone that builds things daily, I like to see things built. But looking at this looking at this application, I have one problem mainly, and that is the height variance. I mean, this is like 6.5, 7 feet taller than what is allowed, and you know, I understand that in certain places, you know, if it's a sloped area where, you know, I'll use the Davis's house as an example on Atlan, where from street level it's about a story and a half tall, but from behind the house it's about 4 stories tall. You know, and those I can see where we can, you know, work with people to make height variances work. But on this particular property, it's a level lot. It's actually above the street, and they're asking for almost the same height allowed as as RM2. So I mean, you can almost have a 4-story building here, is what they're asking for. So, you know, I think it's a bit of a slippery slope to start going down this path of allowing people to build 6, 7 feet taller than what's allowed. I mean, that if you compare it to the houses around it, it's going to be 2 stories taller than anything around it almost. And it is a very big house. I mean, they're asking for an additional 15% space, you know, on top of you're already allowed to cover 50%. There again, you know, this is something that maybe on smaller lots is something that can be utilized to make a little bit bigger houses on smaller lots. This is not a small lot, and this house, envisioning this house right now, it's massive. It's a huge house with way taller than anything around it. So I am concerned that allowing these sort of developments is going to be very impactful to people around them. And I mean, you know, people were concerned about my house, and it's 25 feet tall. This one here is 37 feet taller. So to me, that's a story and a half taller than my house, and people were like, wow, your house is tall. So just putting that out there, but we obviously will have the public hear what they have to say too, if it moves forward.
Other comments? Okay, well, we'll hear from the public and motions on the floor. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, we'll let the neighborhood, yeah, I tend to agree with Councillor Neese here. I drove by the property today. The lot sits above the road a bit. The house behind it's just a single story. It went on second, and so it's going to be quite the monolith there. So I guess we'll have to wait for the neighborhood to decide if they're going to allow it or not, because it's going to be interesting. It's a beautiful looking house. So.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. I'm guessing you're speaking to the rest of them as well?
The next one, yeah.
Okay. So we'll move on to DBP 2206 for 221 11th Street.
Do you
Go
have
ahead.
to move it? Okay. So this is an application for a development variance permit located at 221 11th Street. The request is for a variance of the zoning bylaw section 5.2.6 to repair an existing deck that is currently encroaching on front yard setbacks. The existing deck comes within 1.4 meters from the front property line, and the proposed repair would require consequently a variance of 2.2 meters. And the repair is to fix the age and damage of the deck, the current deck. This would result in no change to the footprint, and there are no known negative impacts of the proposed variance on the surrounding neighborhood. However, the public will have the opportunity to provide input. I'd also like to, I think Rosa provided an updated report to council just ahead of this, but we, in the original one, recommended that the permit be contingent on the consolidation of the lot, or rather, the building permit be contingent on the consolidation of the lot, and we've recently received legal advice that we can only recommend that at this point, or request that, rather than make it contingent.
Okay. So recommendation that council proceeds with the statutory notification process for DBP 2206, moved by Councillor Neese, second by Councillor Cunningham. Discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Next, we have DVP 2203 at 1444 at 2nd Avenue West. Thank you.
Okay, so an application was received for development variance permit for the property located at 1444 2nd Avenue West. The application involves a request for a variance of section 5.2.4 of the zoning bylaw to have a lot coverage of 63% of the site in order to accommodate a proposed addition and deck. The maximum lot coverage in an R2 zone is 50% of the site, so this is a variance of 13% above the maximum lot coverage. The application also involves a request for a variance of section 5.2.6C of the zoning bylaw to have a 0.4572 meter setback from a side property line in relation to the southwestern side property line in order to accommodate a proposed addition and deck. The required setback from a side property line in an R2 zone is 1.2 meters, so this is a variance of 0.7428 meters. The application involves a further request for a variance of section 5.2.6C of the zoning bylaw to have a 0.67056 meter setback from a side property line in relation to the northeastern side property line in order to accommodate a proposed addition and deck. The required setback from a side property line in an R2 zone is 1.2 meters, so this is a 0.52944 meter variance. There are no known negative impacts of the proposed variances on the surrounding neighborhood. However, the public will have an opportunity to provide feedback during the public consultation period.
Moved by, the recommendation being moved by Councillor Niche, second by Councillor Cunningham. Discussion?
Again, I visited this property today, and I was quite impressed with the construction that's going on there. They're doing a hell of a job. It's nice to see somebody take over an old house this old that's been let go, and what they're doing is just it was quite impressive. You know, I'm quite impressed with the workmanship that's going into it, so I definitely support this.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, next one is DVP 2207 for 337 McBride Street.
Yeah, so an application for a development variance permit for the property located at 337 McBride Street. The application involves a request for a variance of section 10.3.0H of the zoning bylaw to erect and keep on a premise a roof sign, including a support structures that extend or project above the roof line of the building on which it is erected. The zoning bylaw prohibits persons from erecting and keeping on a premise a roof sign, including support structures that extend or project above the roof line of the building on which it's erected. So the proposed variance to erect and keep on a premise a roof sign is requested by the applicant so that a present painted roof sign can be replaced with a proposed LED backlit roof sign. There are no known negative impacts of the proposed variances on the surrounding neighborhood, and the public will have the opportunity to provide input during the public consultation period.
Okay, anyone want a recommendation? Moved by Councillor 80, second by Councillor Renhowa. Discussion?
Being on McBride, it's going to be a nice improvement coming into town to see a bright sign instead of a weather-beaten sign that's sitting there now.
I think with this one in particular, it's traditionally it was used like that. So in some ways it makes sense that continue with that. Okay, so any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you very much. Next, we have a report from our Director of Operations and Intergovernmental Relations, a monthly project update. He's on the screen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the update is as provided in the report. 3rd Avenue Extension, 15% complete. We are still waiting for geotechnical information associated with that roadway. Eat Street is now 100% complete. The 24-hour washroom is now open, and we have one of the food trucks on site now operating. The new landfill cell is 100% complete. We are just waiting for the DOCP, which is the operation guideline, to be approved by the ministry. RCMP detachment is 15% complete. The recycling program is 100% complete. We just completed our first audit, and we were very pleased to report that we only have 3.7% of contamination, which is great work, as we've never put on this type of program before, our target was 3%, and so we're just over the target, and we think we can tighten that up with no issues. The SCADA system upgrade is still 5% complete. We are underway. We have our immediate SCADA upgrades happening, and we are still designing the larger system. Sewer treatment still 5%. We are working on new grant funding opportunities with the province to support this project, but it is moving forward. The submarine line, again, 5% complete. Water treatment, 10% complete. These are going out for RFP very soon. The RFPs are with the province right now, and our consultants just getting final review to go on to BC bid shortly. And the waterfront project is 15% complete. We have completed several milestones, and we are working on what's called the PDA for the development agreement moving forward for this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from council?
Just one, Mr. Pucci, on the water or the sewer treatment program. I've had a couple of people, is this the Muskeg treatment you were talking about previously?
No, this is the wetland treatment system. So this is taking our sewer and putting it through a wetland treatment system that cleans and then puts it back out into the local streams or back into the outfall.
Some people on Omanika were concerned about it and had some questions. I guess my question to you would be to get them to get in touch with you if they have specific questions about it.
Yes, please get them in touch with me or Hans Seidemann. He is our project lead and working with the consultants and with the technology, the people that patented the technology. So through me, we can get in touch with the right people to answer the questions.
Okay,
And
thank you very much.
no problem. And sorry, I forgot one update. It was on the other page here. So the Woodworth Dam, still 90% complete. We've had a couple setbacks in the last little while. Some of the excavation and some weather delays set us back a little bit. So we are now projecting the end of May for completion, unfortunately. But we can't help that just due to these delays that came forward.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on, another report from our Director of Operations and Intergovernmental Relations regarding a master service agreement award CT Northern Contractors Alliance partnership.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's nothing else to add to this report. The recommendation is that Mayor and Council award the City of Prince Rupert RFP 2010 contractor services to CT Northern Contractors Alliance Limited Partnership. Thank you.
Okay, moved by Councillor Niche, seconded by Councillor Scott Morvan. Discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Next, we have a report from Corporate Administrator regarding Council Resolution status updates.
There's nothing to add to the report that was provided to you. It's just an update of your resolutions from February.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Okay, we have another report from our Corporate Administrator regarding resolution ratification from a committee of the whole.
This item can be struck from the agenda as there was no resolutions from the committee of the whole.
I see. Got it. Does that have to be there, no matter what, if we have a committee of the whole?
If there's a proposed resolution on the committee of the whole agenda, then we will put that on there, but
Okay.
we can certainly remove it if you wish.
No, I just curious. Okay. Report from planning. The one. Additional items regarding DVP 2107 for 201 7th Avenue East. Is this another someone who want to speak?
No,
this one?
Mr. Mayor, this is a matter that was before council about a month ago. And notices have gone out and it's there for approval now.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, what I have is the council proceeds with the statutory notification process is all I see on mine.
That was the previous report just for informational purposes.
Okay. So the new recommendations for adoption. Okay. Anybody want to move adoption? Moved by Councillor Niche, second by Councillor Cunningham. Discussion? Okay. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, next we have a report from planning regarding ZBLA 2103 for 1220 Portage Road.
Yeah, so this is a recommendation for the first and second readings for a bylaw amendment to the Prince Rupert Official Community Plan, bylaw amendment number 3489, and a zoning bylaw amendment number 3490. The City of Prince Rupert Official Community Plan bylaw number 3489 would amend the Official Community Plan land use designation for the property at 1220 Portage Road from residential to industrial. And then this would allow a zoning bylaw number 3490 to rezone that property, 122 Portage Road, from public facilities or P1 zone to an M1 or light industrial zone. The intended use of the property would be to have a workshop and then a rental space for a tenant that would use it for light industrial purposes. The property at 1220 Portage Road is located at the interface between light industrial and industrial lands and residential lands. So the properties immediately on the block to its south and east are already light industrial, while the properties across the street to its north and west are zoned residential. It is consequently unlikely to add significant additional disturbance to the surrounding area. However, given that there are residential zone lots across the street, although these are not developed yet immediately across the street, we recommend proceeding to a public hearing. The currently zoned property from, rezoning it from public facilities to light industrial would contribute to social and economic goals of the OCP by providing additional space for diversity of industry types that are not dependent on port business. And the applicant at this time has not indicated intent to change the existing structures on the property. However, if the development were to go forward with this rezoning and OCP amendment, it would be they would be subject to development permit guidelines and obtaining a development permit. This would this rezoning and OCP amendment would add no additional cost to the city. Any additional stormwater or sewer servicing requirements would be paid by the applicant or the property owner. And yeah, so the council's options are to give first and second reading and schedule a public hearing, to give first and second reading and decide to forego the public hearing, require additional information, or deny the application.
Okay. Questions or moving?
I'll move if we go to number one, give first and second reading, schedule a public hearing.
Okay, moved by Councillor Cunningham, second by Councillor Niche. Questions, comments? Okay, we'll do Councillor Niche, then Councillor Morrow.
I mean, I don't know if a public hearing is super necessary on this one, being that it's already at industrial buildings. The fact that they were owned by a church before and used by a church is one thing, but it is an industrial area and it is industrial buildings already on site. So I don't think there's going to be much pushback from anyone on that. But that being said, if people choose to have a public hearing, then we guess we go that route.
I think there's no question for me that this property obviously has a higher and better use than P1 designation. The reason I'm in favor of a public hearing is because I think the word you used was it's the interface of residential and industrial properties. Keeping in mind we did rezone multifamily residential on the other side of the street, I am actually very, very curious to see what type of public feedback we'll get at public hearing. One thing I'm wondering if it's possible for the public hearing, assuming that it passes tonight. There was another property that we rezoned, maybe someone on council recalls, another property we rezoned in that area that we put a covenant on because we were concerned about the compatibility of I think it was noise was the particular covenant. I'm just hoping if we can get
2015 or something like that?
Yeah, it was a few years ago,
Yeah,
and
right.
it was around some concerns of people in the Oasis apartments, or I believe it was around noise in an adjacent property. So it'd be helpful context for us to know exactly what the covenant was at that time, just so we have that option in our arsenal.
I think that was actually the property beside Joe's Auto Body where the fellow wanted to he wanted to rent it to use it as a towing yard.
Was it Jay's Towing?
And he never ended up moving in there, but
Oh,
that
yeah.
was
Oh,
what he
okay.
wanted to
Right.
do. He wanted to move it.
That's
And
right.
so
I remember that.
people were concerned that there was going to be a junkyard beside the apartments.
Okay.
So I don't recall putting a covenant on it, but
Yeah, we did though.
Yeah, and
I don't-
the reason I bring that up is because I'm trying to preempt what some of the concerns might be around having, a multifamily residential area right next to a working industrial property. I don't remember what the specific language of that covenant was, but we all had that debate at that time, and obviously settled on something. So that would be helpful context as we move forward on this one. So thank you.
Bringing up the historical records. Okay, other comments? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. And we have the Business Regulations and Licensing Bylaw number 3476/2021. Recommendation that council give fourth and final reading to the City of Prince Rupert Business and Regulations Licensing Bylaw number 3476/2021. Moved by Councillor Moreau, seconded by Councillor Renhowa. Discussion, I think there was some questions, Mr. Buchan, from the last presentation. Do you have a report out on that, on those items?
Yes, Rosa will be providing the report, the
Okay.
update.
Thank you. So the first question had to do with the notification provided from landlords to tenants and whether it was in accordance with the Residential Tenancy Act. In fact, the act was changed, and a landlord must provide notice through the tenancy branch, so they must actually apply, and then a hearing is done. So while we can change the wording to note that the owner shall deliver through an application to the Residential Tenancy Board, the way the bylaw is currently written, a landlord could still provide notice to the tenant. There's just an alternative route to do that now. It is still technically accurate. It just, for clarification purposes, we could add through the Residential Tenancy Board or branch, should council wish to do that. In addition, there were some questions about the section 44, I believe, of the proposed bylaw that indicated the landlord to provide the tenant to move out, to provide rent, other access, etc. This is actually over and above what is provided in the Act. In the Act, the right of first refusal is only for properties with 5 or more units. This bylaw actually is over and above that. As well, the bylaw, as presented, speaks to providing alternative housing while the renovations are in place, and the Act currently does not speak to that.
The concern that was raised, I think, at that time though was, does it make sense for someone like a small family that owns one home to have to provide accommodation for that family to have to, because his argument was like, does it make sense for that family to have to be able to provide that kind of housing if it's just like one home? That was the concern. Is that still what the recommendation would be?
I think that we're open for council's discretion on that. Do you have alternate wording to change that one to exclude single-family dwellings?
Yes, there is actually some legal information which would indicate that we would just need to amend and add an exclusion for that section. I think it was previously proposed. In order to do that, we would need to repeal the third reading, add the single-family dwelling as an exclusion, and then return for third reading.
I'm just talking that one out. Is there other notes from the thing? Okay, so that was the only thing I think for me that was concerning to me was I kind of agree with that point that if a family owns a home and they're just renovating that home, them having to provide the cost of living for another family to move out while they're doing those renovations versus like multifamily, to me is like, I don't know, I'm not sure that's a good cost to put onto a single family homeowner. And that was kind of what Paul's argument was. He's said, he says, I'm a proponent of making sure tenant rights, but that in that particular circumstance, is that a fair cost to a homeowner to burden that brunt, right? Which to me, I feel might not be warranted. I think that might be a step too far, but I'd like to hear what you guys think about that particular one. I personally would like to make an amendment to that one, because yeah, if you have an apartment building, okay, that makes a little bit more sense because it could be large scale relocations as we witnessed with Pinecrest, right? These are things that I think need to be addressed. But, you know, if one family is renovating a home, they, you know, most likely having a hard time affording the renovations in the first place, and then on top of that paying for the people that are relocating, that might just be a non-starter for many people, and I'm not sure that's a wise decision for us to make, but I'd like to hear what you guys have to think about that. I'm not proposing an amendment yet, go ahead.
I agree with you on that one.
Okay.
No, I tend to agree with that. It adds a lot of expense to a person that has a single-family dwelling and wants to renovate. But my concern is still the single-family dwelling. And, you know, you can have, you know, like Paul said, the majority of his advocacy work for renovictions and that is a single-family dwelling or a single-family dwelling with a suite. And you get a lot of people in lower or mid-range incomes that are going to live in those places and are afraid to complain about the living conditions simply because there's no place to go. And, you know, it's still a fair amount of our residents that rent property that are in that category. And I really think we shouldn't exempt single-family dwellings from that. And his whole discussion revolved around that, how you know, people with single-family dwellings are very vulnerable if we exempt them. And I'd like to see that exemption taken out of there and include single-family dwellings with the amendment that they, you know, the landlord's not responsible for the finding alternate in that situation, because it's a big problem right now, and I think it's only going to get worse with our shortage of housing stock and that. So I'm really passionate about that one particular aspect of this, because I know of one incident personally where the landlord came up to him and said, well, I'm putting your rent up $250 a month. And the guy says, well, you can't do that. And he says, well, if you don't agree to that, I'm just going to kick you out and renovate the house. So the guy had to agree to it. You know, he's lived there for 7-8 years. Yes, his rent was a little lower than market, quite a bit lower than market rent, but still, you know, you're leaving that person in a very vulnerable position, because if they complain, he says, oh, I'm going to do a major renovation, you'll have to move out anyway. So, you know, where are they? And this is a single family income. They can afford what they were paying, but they can't afford much more. And it's already put a strain on the finances of that particular family. And I just think we should be here to protect those type of people.
So, Mr. Buchan, are you able to speak to how our bylaw, does it address that kind of issue, or does it not?
Mr. Mayor, our bylaw does require standard of maintenance for single-family dwellings. The issue that's being articulated is, you know, by excluding single-family dwellings from being required to be registered for rentals, you know, this notion that if they're not registered, then, you know, perhaps that somebody can get away with being a bad landlord. The way, so right now there is no protection for those residents at all. This bylaw would bring in a standard of maintenance in the bylaw to ensure that the city has an ability to act on bad landlords and you know, rental accommodations that do not stand up to the appropriate standards. The bylaw is very specific and elaborates on what those standards are. So now that would be complaint driven. The unintended consequence of having single-family dwellings licensed would be that some people may not want to be licensed. Some people may, you know, not be, and may withdraw their stock from the rental supply. That's the unintended consequence on housing supply. The other aspect of putting single-family dwellings into a licensing scheme is, of course, the additional staff work for all of the single-family dwellings and suites that would be throughout the municipality, and the enforcement of following up on those and pursuing that and business license. It would be a significant effort, which certainly we can do. My biggest concern is the potential loss of rental stock from those for various reasons that may not want to be licensed. So, you know, that's in response to the last question. With respect to section 4.4 and the issues of the question of whether or not there needs to be notice and whether or not there needs to be alternative rental provided for people in suites. You can simply do an amendment to 4.4A by noting excluding secondary suites in single-family dwellings, and you could do that tonight.
Okay.
We will have to come back because you'll be amending this at third. We will have to come back to the next meeting to adopt this because we still need to have that separation between third and fourth.
So just on the other note then, so basically for what Councillor Cunningham's suggesting, say, essentially what we would be is we would be our own residential tenancy branch with our own database of single family rentals basically, that we would be in charge of enforcement from there moving forward. Is that were to be the way we went about it?
This bylaw gives the city the power to step in and enforce once a complaint has been made, enforce the bylaw standard to ensure that the suite is brought up to standard. Just as we would if it was licensed. You know, in both cases, you know, there'd have to be a complaint. We'd have to be aware of it. And so what we thought we would do after speaking with Paul at the last meeting was to put information out on our website and our you know, push information out about tenant rights and ability for tenants in substandard poorly maintained suites to make a complaint, and we can have, you know, our bylaw go out and enforce it.
Right.
So we can push information out, and we would do that in cooperation with the presenter at the last meeting.
So I guess what I'm suggesting, just to, if we were to make the amendment that Councillor Cunningham's suggesting, what would end up happening is we would create a licensing framework, municipal, that
Yes.
every homeowner right now that rents would have to register to,
That's what the bylaw
which
would.
then we would
yeah.
have to be in control of
Yeah.
that entire system. So basically, we would be creating our own little residential tenancy branch of the city for all single-family homes and suites, if that's the way we went about it, right?
That's right.
That's kind of, so what your proposal here is kind of a balanced version of that, where we would have a mechanism for, you know, discovering, say, if suites were not legal, and people could complain about that, and then we could make them get into compliance at a complaint-driven level, versus a blanket licensing situation that forces everyone into a new system, and then there may be a possibility that people decide that they're not going to rent their homes anymore because there's added layer of bureaucracy and that they don't want to be participating on that. That's kind of why.
Yeah, and then everybody may not.
I'm just trying to make sure I'm crystal clear in terms of.
I think that's part of it. For various reasons, which I won't go into, people may opt out of, you know, that having their suites rented.
So my other question then would be on resourcing. So I'm guessing then if we were to say make an amendment like that, that would certainly be a budget issue for us, wouldn't it not?
I think that would definitely have a budget implication. I mean, that's there are many homes here, and if we're going to be getting into the inspection, I guess, service, and following up on all the single-family dwellings that are rented in suites, that's a significant workload. We would have to assess, you know, the work for that, but I think that certainly has resource implications that would have a budget impact.
And the reason why I'm saying this is because, you know, if we wanted to make an amendment to this at another time, we could just bring forward an amendment and do another 4 readings, right?
Absolutely.
So one of the things I would say maybe to Councillor Cunningham, because I'm not necessarily disagreeing with what you're saying. However, I think it's one of those situations where we could be jumping into the dark and not knowing what the cost would be on us if we pass this right now. That maybe the staff could figure out what a cost of something like that would be, because I'm guessing that we would probably, with where we're heading with housing, long term, it's starting to look like we're going to need staff person who's going to be a housing person on city staff. I've seen that happen in big cities. We're a small city. We're not really equipped to do that. If we're going to take on a type of responsibility like that, create a licensing framework, all that kind of stuff, it would be interesting to you know, maybe have staff look into what the cost for something like that would be, that we could maybe throw onto the strategic plan for debate at maybe next year's budget time, but that we could potentially get the ball rolling with a bylaw that makes sense to get started, that puts some measures in place, because I would not want us to be passing something that we can't pay for. And we heard from the budget tonight, and we have no idea what the implication is if we have passed that with an amendment like that would be longer term without first analyzing the cost. So it's not a disagreement more than it is about maybe that would be the process in terms of how we can figure that out. And that's something I just wanted to see if you would be interested in doing it that way, Councillor.
Well, first of all, what's this bylaw for? It's to protect the renters. And by taking what the housing advocate said is 70% of his advocacy is towards single-family dwellings or single-family dwellings with suites, we are taking a very large percentage of our problem and saying, oh, we're not going to worry about it unless they complain. And we know damn well by our bylaw enforcement in this town, complaint-driven isn't working. You know, you drive around this town and you see cars up on blocks with the hood off, and you see houses in disrepair, tarps on roofs and everything else, you know, and you look at our maintenance bylaw, it has teeth in it, and they're not being enforced. And even when people complain, nothing happens. And the mayor over a year ago came out and looked at a house 2 away from me, and it was brought to bylaws. It's still sitting there. It's starting to lean over on the other house now, so when do we do something about it? When it actually collapses on the house beside it? And this is going to be the same thing. And I don't agree with you, we're going to lose housing stock. If somebody complains about a house that's in bad enough shape that it's going to cost the landlord money to fix it up, he's probably going to take it off the bloody market anyway, because he's there to make money. He doesn't care about the tenant in some of these places. Some landlords are good, some aren't. But anything, you know, with the exception of the Angus apartments, I don't think you could find an apartment in this town that hasn't been maintained, because it's a big investment. And people want to keep their tenants there, and they want to keep the value of their building. These single-family dwellings that are rented out, people are buying something that's almost falling down and renting it out because they can right now, because people need a place to stay. And that's part of it. And you know, I think just as many houses will be taken off the market if somebody complains about it, or it'll be taken off the market. He'll do a little. They'll leave, and then he'll do some cosmetic work and put it back on the market for as much or more. And I look at this maintenance bylaw as something to protect the renters. By leaving out the largest part of our rental market, we're not helping the renters. And you know, complaint driven just has not worked in this town, and that's a fact, and other councillors in this room will agree with me. Our bylaw enforcement's pathetic because of complaint driven. I've complained and nothing's happened, and I'm a councillor. I don't know what happens when other people complain. You know, you think maybe because you're a councillor they might listen to you. They still don't listen to you. So, you know, I just think that we should be taking care of the biggest part of the problem. That's all.
Councillor
Morrow. Before I voice my own thoughts on this exemption piece, I think we all have an easy agreement on the First Amendment that our corporate administrator brought up, which is just to add the residential tenancy branch notification process. So
and the
that, and then
the
the exemption
Yeah.
for single family. I think the threshold you mentioned was 5 units or more. I think those will be relatively uncontroversial. So before I get into the debate on the single family dwelling exemption on the fees and licensing, can I move the amendment that we add the residential tenancy branch notification process amendment, as well as the single-family dwelling exemption for the cost of temporary accommodations to units of 5 or more?
So moved by Councillor Morrow, seconded by Councillor Niche. Discussion about the amendments. Okay, all's in favor? Any opposed? Okay, the motion has been amended. Now
Okay.
back to the main motion.
Okay. So the reason I wanted to approach it that way is because with the motion as amended now, we haven't made a change yet to what Councillor Cunningham has raised. So I want to respond to some of these points that he's raised, and why I think it's a much more controversial amendment, and also unworkable to a certain extent. So the first thing is to cast the argument as somehow a carte blanche exemption for all single-family houses is incorrect. They are only exempt from registration and fees. They are still responsible to meet Part 4, which is all the minimum standards, maintenance standards, and they are still bound by Part 5, which is the building renovations, which is all the protections that we're talking about for renters. Single-family dwellings are still responsible for adhering to those two parts of the bylaw, which is, in my opinion, the critical part of this. So, to say that it's somehow a loophole or some type of purposeful evasion or some kind of, wholesale exemption for single-family dwellings is not correct. Really what we're talking about is, do single-family dwellings that have a rental unit in them need to register with the city and pay a fee? They still have to maintain minimum maintenance standards. They still have to adhere to building renovations. So from my perspective, I do agree with what Dr. Buchan has brought up, that when we try to think about what our main objective is, well, there's a couple. First is protecting the people who we know are afraid to complain. That's a very obvious issue. We want to incentivize good behavior from landlords, but we also want to penalize the bad behavior for those not doing those things. So the issue that Councillor Cunningham raises is an important one for people who are afraid to complain. But the problem in asking every single family dwelling with a basement suite or a one bedroom apartment or whatever that they have in there as a rental, the bad actors will not register anyways. They will not pay the fee anyways, and it will still have to be complaint driven in the end anyways. So to me, it's much more important for us to get something on the books that we can actually enforce in terms of the maintenance standards and the building renovations. Because if we don't do that, then we're not going to be able to protect the rights of existing tenants. So to me, time is of the essence. The other point I would make is, as far as I understand, it would be completely unprecedented for a city to go and raise taxes to not just duplicate what the province is doing, but the whole point of the rent eviction bylaw when it passed the appeals court in the city of New Westminster was that the court said it had to be complementary to the residential tenancy brackets. It cannot be antagonistic, and that's what I think we risk doing. So where I'm left with is I don't want to see us add significant amount of cost and paperwork, not just to staff, but also to the average, the average single family dwelling owner who might have a basement suite or a rental apartment in their house. It doesn't make sense to me to add the cost and paperwork when we can still enforce the things that are most important, which is the maintenance standards and the building renovations. So to me, that's where Part 4 and Part 5 is where we protect people the most. It's not in the fees that we charge. It's not in the registration. It's not in the paperwork. It's purely on the enforcement side. So for people who are afraid to complain, the risk we run in not passing this bylaw in a timely manner is that those bad actors will not register anyways. So it'll still have to be complaint driven anyways, and then we can't actually do anything to protect those people. So I'm left with wanting to vote in favor of the bylaw as it has been amended with those two amendments.
Other comments? Councillor Rady?
As a question, if we're not going to move towards registering all of these properties, how will we know where they are? How will we know how many people are renting basement suites in houses? If we're going to, my point being that if we are saying that the teeth here are in the maintenance standards, then we need to know where they are in order to have some sense of some kind of a sense of whether the standards are being met.
Mr. Mayor, through to Councilor Ady, we would know by way of complaint. We don't have an inventory. We wouldn't be doing an inventory. So, yes, this would be complaint driven, and that was in the original report. Is it would be on a basis of complaint. If it's an entirely different matter, and council can certainly take staff can certainly take council's direction on this. We can undertake inventories. We can build a system. We can do all of that. But that is resource intensive, and if we're to do that this year, we are going to have to come back to you with an amendment to the proposed budget.
Without suggesting that it go that far, then it does seem to me that we need to put some thought into how to make the complaint-driven process work a little better. I'm not quite willing to go as far in terms of criticizing the people that do the work of responding to complaints, because I think that their time is limited and their resources are limited, and there are limited numbers of them, and I understand that. But I do think that it needs to be much less intimidating for somebody who's in a position of need, because when you are renting a place and there is no obvious other place to live, you're in a position of need. And what that does, I think, is it creates that reluctance to complain, and I think we need to try and find a way to break that down a little bit to make that a less threatening process to enter into.
Through the mayor, we would propose to have process and information on our website. We have spoken with the housing advocate and would push information out through his office, and he has reach as well to lay that out and assist people in reaching out for help.
That was what I was going to say. I think they had a conversation after that meeting, and between the two of them, I think they have about 1,400 clients or something like that they work with. So, for us to be able to have access, for them to have access in terms of making a complaint, it can be done through a partnership with us and the Unemployment Action Center, where they could have the confidence of being able to have that anonymity to be able to say that there's a problem, which then Paul could refer to us and we could make that case. Now, the issue, I think what Councillor Cunningham's getting at here is with the enforcement piece. The reason why the entire enforcement apparatus of this community is complaint driven is because council has never chosen to budget for enforcement. It's us that aren't allocating the resources to be proactively enforcing, because we have other budgetary constraints. When we all came into office, we have a $70 million water supply we're building. We got waste treatment that could be another $70 million. We've got roads in disrepair. We managed to double the roads budget. We've got all kinds of infrastructure challenges and services we're trying to do, and a new community we're trying to build. And not everything is a priority. I mean, we haven't had a budget discussion yet, but a proposed 3% tax increase, I'm certain that we're going to have some opinions on just that amount, let alone what would most likely be another $500,000 minimum additional enforcement budget to really get to the level that you're speaking to, right? We have 2 bylaw officers and one bylaw officer now? 2, 1? We have 2, theoretically, 2 positions
we
are
have 2
open, one
positions.
needs to be filled.
We have 2 positions, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So regardless, that's not just for homes, that's not just for derelict properties, that's for all the issues of a community, of a growing community. For us to go to every single home in town costs us staff, time, resources, legal fees. I mean, we've had one individual who finally got deemed a vexatious litigant who cost the city $70,000 alone back in 2017. I remember just one individual from a variety of complaints, because we have to go through a legal process with every single complaint. We have to show a judge without reasonable doubt that we treated these people fairly. You're timesing that by 1,000 properties. We're talking that needs to be resourced. So that's another problem for the future councils to deal with. They're going to have to think about that because that will be something that will have to be addressed long term. But we have competing priorities in the moment. That's why it is complaint driven. It's tell us what the problem is. We have our literally reporting tools now on the app where people can just go, I got a complaint. We're trying to make it as easy as possible. Now, with what you're suggesting is essentially adding another layer of bureaucracy. I mean, I'm certain that the Tennessee branch has a list of the rentals that are single family, right? The provincial government has that, right? I mean, you have to register there, you have to sign forms, because the provincial government is in charge of housing. And theoretically, under the Local Government Act, we are not in charge of housing. We are in charge of land use regulations. These types of bylaws are forward-thinking things that are actually new to cities. I mean, New Westminster was the brave one that kind of stepped out and they were challenged in court and then they won in court. And we've actually, I think, even gone even further than that. Isn't that correct, Mr. Buchan? Right? This bylaw actually goes even further than the New West bylaw in terms of our ability to protect people. But from what I think you're suggesting, Councillor Cunningham, it's the same problem as the enforcement issue, is that we need to allocate a budget to it. And right now, I think in this moment tonight, we don't know what the cost of adding that next layer would be. And so that's why I'm not suggesting that it's not something to look at. I think it's something with the process that we've outlined with strategic planning, that kind of thing. You would need to get a report on that, and you would need to actually figure out how much does something like that actually cost? How is that administered? Who's in charge of that? What's the staff time on that? So that would be, I would suggest, as something we would do in the future to look at that. But I agree with what Councillor Moreau is saying, is that we need to actually do something now to get something moving. And I think in the immediate term, working with the Unemployment Action Center to create a pipeline of communication between their agency and our staff in terms of the complaints, and that we have a process of following up, and even maybe in some accountability back to council, so that we can hear. I mean, since Mr. Buchan has come on, we have regular project updates. We have follow-up on all our council resolutions, and this could be just another layer, like, hey, we've got some complaints, we're taking a look at it if that's one of the concerns. But I think we just need to take a look at the bigger picture of it, and I kind of agree with what Councillor Moreau is suggesting here, that we just need to move forward. And this particular item, I think there's unknowns to it that need to just be more fleshed out, and they could still be fleshed out. That's would be my other counter argument to that.
I have no problem supporting this because it's better than nothing. I'll be the first to say that. It does give some protection, but at the same time it leaves a lot of people unprotected, and that's my concern. And so and right now our staff doesn't have the time to prepare a study on how much this is going to cost and everything. Our staff's maxed out. We all know that. They're going above and beyond most of the time anyway, contrary to popular belief. Rosa comes down here on Saturday afternoons and night. Corinne's working night and day. But the bottom line is, in the future, I would like to see something like that looked at. Now, whether it's with this council or the next one, and like I agree with Councillor Moreau, this is a good start, but it's still leaving a lot of people unprotected, and it's people that need the protection that we're leaving unprotected. And that's the end of it. That's all I got to say. We could be here all night, but I don't definitely support this here. It's better than, like Councillor Moreau says, we've got to start someplace. This is a good start. It's giving these people protection only if they want to complain. And in a lot of cases, they're not going to complain because, hey, oh, well, I got to renovate the house. I'm sorry, you're going to have to move out. It's going to be a problem. I can see it as soon. And you talk about not having the staff to enforce it. What if we do get a lot of complaints?
Yeah. Well,
do we have the staff to look after 20, 30 complaints? No, we don't. So, we're right back to point A. But anyway, I'll call a question on this. I got no problem with it.
I think there's other people wanting to have a discussion, so.
I was going to suggest that if you want to forward the topic of enhancing this to strategic planning for next year, I would recommend actually doing that by resolution so it's not lost.
Right.
Sure. Okay, call the question then.
Well, I think Councillor Moreau and then Councillor
Okay.
Scott Marver wanted to say something. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I agree with what's on the floor because really it's, aside from the cost and resources, I think that this is a good start, and we really need to emphasize policies that have a lens of compassion, because I think, folks that are in the rental situation and trying to juggle multiple occupations and different things like that, to have a step process that also risks you losing your home as well. I think there's a lot of pieces to that, and there's some holes. So I agree with Councillor Cunningham as well. And maybe this is something that's worth exploring in the future.
Councillor Morrow.
Yeah, I'll start by saying I wouldn't be opposed to exploring the implications further. I'll go that far. But on this point of, if we try to summarize who we think will be left unprotected by this bylaw, it's those who will not complain or have someone else complain on their behalf. And so this is why I think the province absolutely has to step up, where we are picking up the pieces of their jurisdiction that are not being looked after in rural and remote communities. It's not just Prince Rupert. We need to remember that. It's every small community throughout the entire province, throughout the entire country. But when it comes back to those who will not complain or have people complain on their behalf, the reason that I'm not in favor of having every single family dwelling apply for a license and have to pay the fee is because, I mean, I'd said it before, the bad actors won't do that in the first place. They will not pay the fees. They will not do the paperwork. They will just keep it off the books. But even the good actors, the good landlords, the single family that wants to just have that mortgage helper with the basement suite, I think even they would be unlikely to come forward in a number of cases, because I think they open themselves up to some issues in having to declare that income there. And that's a serious concern for me, because the alternative that we're suggesting here is, even if we did, as a city, require every single family dwelling, every single rental unit, every single basement suite to register with the city, we knew where every single one of them was, we knew every address, the only way that we can protect the people who aren't complaining is having a rotating team of bylaw officers to go and knock on every door on a rotating basis. I mean, there's no way that we can, as a city, make up for the province's lack of investment and lack of enforcement. So for me, unless we pass the minimum maintenance standards, and unless we pass the protections on the building renovations, what we're going to end up being left with is a debate over whether or not we should be charging fees to the family with a rental or a basement suite, which I just don't think is fair to ask. I don't want us to see an issue where people are trying to go underground and we're making the problem that we're trying to solve worse. So for me, I would much rather pass something now with these amendments than, well, I would say, I'll go back to the start. I would much rather explore these implications as part of strategic planning and have that debate at a future date, so we can actually get these protections in place in a reasonable time frame.
But Gurvinder, sorry, then you. Sorry, my bad. That was my bad. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Councillor Meru already said what I was going to say. So yeah, it's a good start, and I support this motion. And until our staff can find how much cost, further sources for the next motion, until then, I think we are good to start here. And we can change our motion anytime until we find how much the cost for the sources and how much impact on the property taxes. Until then, I support this motion.
Councillor Nish.
Yeah, I'm just going to add the piece to this where, people, if you did hypothetically had everyone registered, and you probably are going to reduce a lot of rental stock. I'll give an example. I just recently had heard of a fellow that I know a little bit, who he actually just bought a house, but previous to buying the house, he actually lived in a newly renovated suite, which I just found out that actually only had a toaster oven, a microwave, and a hot plate. But it was a place for him to live until he was able to buy a house. It was clean, it was comfortable. Was it legal? No, but it was somewhere for him to live. He could afford to pay whatever rent because, he's got a good job. Now, if you all of a sudden eliminate that unit, even though it may be illegal, You eliminate that one place where someone's kind of skirting the rules a bit, then you're just taking one more rental place off the market. So you know, by taking too much action can cause the reaction of a lot of places, just people saying, whoa, I'm going to get in trouble here. I better back off. I better take my little somewhat illegal mother-in-law suite down in the basement there and take it off the market. So, you know, it can have a tragic action the other way too. By enforcing too much, we may lose, you know, 100 units that, you know, maybe they're renting to a friend, or maybe they're renting to you know, someone close to them, where, you know, it's maybe not an ideal or perfect one-bedroom suite, but it is something where someone can live. I mean, I remember Joy Thurkelson telling me that back in the 70s, you know, people came to town and they slept on people's couches. They rented people's rooms. And that's kind of the situation we're in now. I mean, we're in a place where, you know, people are renting rooms and suites that maybe not considered a real suite, but more of an in-law suite. And that's what we're doing to survive right now. And I think by enforcing too much, you're actually going to probably even make it worse.
Okay.
Just as an aside to that, when I first came to Prince Rupert, I stayed in one half of one of the cabins down in Skunk Hollow. And there are people around here that will remember that, and they'll know how small that was.
All right, is there any further discussion? Okay, so clearly we're going to probably have some follow-up. We'll maybe do a resolution for the next council meeting for that particular item. But if there's no other discussion, then all is in favor tonight. Anybody oppose? Okay, that's unanimous. Okay, thanks for the discussion. These are important issues, and ultimately I think we've done something that I'm not sure any other communities in the north have done yet, have they? Yeah, I think we're certainly taking some housing action, and I think that's the most important thing. So any reports, inquiries, or messages from council?
One thing that was brought to my attention today, that people can no longer buy memorial plaques for the wall down at Mariners Park from the city, and I just wanted to know if that's a new policy we've got, because you used to be able to come in and get a memorial plaque to put up on the wall there, and people are wondering what's happening with that.
I can answer that. So the program hasn't ended. There's just some review being undertaken of the program, but people are welcome to call, and we'll add their name to a list. And when we can see where that goes and how the plaques go, then we'll continue to work down the list. But the program has not ended. It's just being reviewed.
What's the issue with the program that's being reviewed? If you don't mind me asking?
We need more space. So we need to determine where the
we're
next.
running out of room down
We're
there.
running out of room. So
Okay.
the review is being undertaken to determine where we're going to
plaques
put.
could go?
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Okay.
And one other thing that's probably not a lot the city can do about it, but the South Finger at Fairview, the city's talking about expanding, and you've got a lot of working boats there, draggers, big seiners and that, and there's quite a concern about if they're going to be getting kicked out, if and where they can go. So it's possibly, I don't know if we can have staff send a letter to Port Ed Harbor Authority to find out if they have an alternate plan or anything for it, because these are boats that are too big to just tie up in a little yacht club or that. You know, they're up to 120, 150 feet. And they have been the backbone of the fishing industry in this town for years and years, and they're still supplying a lot of jobs. So it's something, there's not a lot we can do about it officially, but at least we can send a letter to Port Ed Harbor Authority and see if they are going to come up with extra moorage in Rushbrook or something for that, please.
Yeah, I think that's good. We can talk to Small Craft Harbor, see where they're at with that. Other reports?
I just wanted to extend appreciation to AFNO, which is the Association des Francophones and Francophiles du Nord-Ouest, Francophones in the Northwest. They're an organization whose role is to promote French language and culture, to develop and offer community and educational services in French, and to participate in economic development. So last Saturday they did all of that by feeding us. at the Sugar Shack. And not only was it delightful because it was delicious, but it was also the reincarnation of an event that had been put on pause because of COVID. And I know that organization, along with many others, have had to stick-handled the last 2 years to do the things they do in different ways. This is no exception. But it was brilliant to be able to participate, and it was much appreciated to see that return to something resembling normal. So I appreciate AFNO.
Any other reports?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I brought up a few months ago too about the potholes. So I know winter conditions, but now it's getting really, all the roads getting potholes. So I was wondering if we have any plan for soon to fix those ones. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Motion to adjourn. Moved by Councilor Morrow, second by Councilor Ady. All those in favor? Meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much.